Hello and welcome to another episode of Go, Go, Grow. My name is Michelle Page. I'm your host and also the founder of Revenue Chasers. If you are a business-to-business SMB and you're looking to scale your company, you're in the right place. My guest today is a dear friend and colleague, Jim Kerlin. Jim is a professional sales coach and the founder of Jim Kerlin Consulting. I have had the supreme pleasure of knowing Jim and working with him on pretty much every aspect of the professional relationship since, Jim, when was it? Early 2000s?
Yes, it's got to be like around 2006 or 7, somewhere in there.
Wow. Well, welcome, Jim. I'm so happy to have you here.
Good to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. So, like you mentioned, early 2000s, when we started working together, it was with actually at the time, an SMB, and we were both in sales leadership positions. I'd like to say it's pretty much due to our wonderful business acumen and sales leadership. They are now a billion-dollar globally traded company. Might be spreading that on a little thick, but we did have some wonderful learning experiences there, and I think we had a great foundation together on sales coaching tools, sales practices, best practices, and it ran the gamut of face-to-face, which was a lot of your expertise, inbound and outbound, which was my expertise, and just how integrated both of those are. Do you want to talk a little bit about kind of the genesis of how you and I worked together and where that led our relationship?
Well, sure. I mean, we obviously hit some President's Clubs together because we both were doing very well. And I was asked to come and move back to Atlanta to be there in the corporate office where you were at already. And like you said, you were handling some outbound stuff. I had come in from the field sales, and they asked me to pioneer an effort for the product that I was selling in the field and get that going in the outbound. Well, what happened is over just a few short years, that turned a call center that was probably, 30 or 40 people into 100 plus real fast. And so it was a phenomenal success to the point that they continued to bring in other multinational companies as clients and have entire sales teams devoted just to them. So I continued at that point and went on into operational type of positions there and was over a lot of the field and agency people. So it was like 40 reps out in the field, plus I think it was probably another 27, 30 reps with the agencies. And I was traveling. I was as you'd say, that road warrior, flying anywhere from Salt Lake City and Denver, Albuquerque to Chicago and down into Florida and so forth. So it was a lot of fun.
Right. Well, the reason I bring that up, Jim, is as you can see, we both have that deep expertise in scaling a sales organization to support the scaling of the larger organization. And that's why I naturally said, you know what, if I want to have somebody on that's a true expert in this area, how to really tap into sales expertise and how to make the most of not only sales coaching and planning, either as an individual contributor, as a leader, as an entrepreneur, or as the actual organization level. What's the best way to do that? And I thought of when I hired you as my business coach. You remember that?
Oh yeah, it's just been a couple of years ago. I remember.
It was. So we've been colleagues, we've been friends. You've been my absolute lighthouse in a lot of touch point situations where I needed a wise colleague to speak with. But I sought you out as my business coach You want to take a guess why?
Tell me why.
Uh,
Probably, I would guess that you trusted me.
well,
That was probably a big
absolutely.
factor. Probably, I don't know. I had been through the entrepreneurial steps that you were about to step into,
Hmm.
and so I had a little bit I could share there. And even today, with what we're going to share with your guest, is going to be a tool that can be used by either a solopreneur or a small business that doesn't even have a client relationship management or CRM software yet,
Hmm.
anywhere up to an enterprise level system.
Absolutely.
And that was one of the ones that the corporation we were working in was fleshing out was Salesforce.com,
Yeah.
which is a big enterprise wide one.
And if you
And
don't
so
do it,
whether you've got just a spreadsheet that you're working with as an individual, or you're somehow in anything from a CRM standpoint, all the way up to Salesforce.com, we have a tool that will help them today.
absolutely. And when you do have those large tech stacks, if you don't implement and utilize them correctly and then analyze the data for better performance correctly, they're really not paying off your ROI. So let's set the stage here. When you went into the operations standpoint, I think just knowing you well, I think that's kind of what led you to possibly become an entrepreneur yourself and start a franchise with a very well-known national training organization, Sandler, who is pretty much the keystone of that is very process-oriented, very structured. And I think that is probably a great influence on your coaching style. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's a great organization. It's a great process, and they have their own unique approach that they take to the sales process that's different from traditional selling. And there are reasons for that. And most of those are so that you don't end up being the pawn of a prospect, and you actually maintain control of the process. I would say one of the biggest things that you accomplish in that process is that you don't waste time with people that are tire kickers, that are not going to do business with you. You learn very quickly how to, I guess you'd say, qualify,
And disqualify.
and more importantly, disqualify,
Yeah. See, I've
so
learned
that you're
from
not
you,
wasting
Jim.
your time or theirs.
I've studied at your feet. Absolutely. And as I mentioned, you were formally with the organization, but when you have that imprint of what you've learned and what's worked well for you, anyone out there, they kind of relate to other areas of their life, of their business. And one of the things that you and I both have kind of rolled out into just the way we approach business is you need to have a plan, you need to have a strategy, and you need to have goals. And you need to be able to track those goals. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Absolutely. So, as my audience has seen on past episodes, I'm very big on strategic planning. When I engaged you as my business coach, one of the first questions you asked me is, what are your goals? What was the second question you asked me? You may not remember, but what do you think it would have been?
Who's your target audience?
Yeah?
What else did I ask you? Probably did you know your communication style so that you could flex to be able to communicate with others? Because a
Absolutely.
lot of what's going on with selling is really you're having a conversation,
Uh-huh.
and you're needing to build that rapport and that trust as quickly as possible.
And that kind of aligns with the DISC assessment that you and I have worked with or talked about so many times. But I'm thinking of the activities, because if you have a goal,
Oh yeah.
you have to be able to measure it and track it and be able to look at, okay, well, what do I need to get to that goal? So I remember.
And that's what you wanted us to speak a lot about today. I know. So
Yes,
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 that's part of it. That's definitely part of it. Tracking is a big piece of your process. If you
yes.
don't have a process that you can replicate, then you really don't have a process.
There you go. And to be
And
scalable.
this tool is going to be one that's going to help you be focused on the things that matter to you, because everybody's goals are different. Everybody's way of tracking those goals may be different, but essentially it comes down to finding out what are the leading indicators that need to be done in order to reach the outcomes that you want.
So for every sales rep, do they pretty much have the same leading indicators?
Some of them can be. I mean, when you think about it, a lot of things boil down to what are the sales activities that you're going to do. And those are either going to be, if you want to put them in a broad bucket, you can say some of them are going to be prospecting activities. Some of them are going to be presentation or delivering the service type of activities. And then some of them are just going to be tracking so that you know the feedback about, is this working or not? Is this goal something that I've already met and I need to find a different goal to be working on now and continue to build on that and adjust and change. It's not like you set something up and it's like carved in stone and it's never going to change. It is dynamic all the time. The other thing that you'll notice that we'll talk about is on this tracking worksheet, there are personal goals on there as well.
You have to be a whole person.
That's a trap, really. It's a trap so that you'll do the business goals, because most people will stick with their personal goals. But so we just put a few of those down there so that you got something that we know you'll do, and then that just forces you to pull that sheet or that spreadsheet out. So you say, oh yeah, and I've got these business goals too.
Yeah. Well, what I'd love for you to do, Jim, is I'd love you to walk us through what that spreadsheet is, and we're going to pop up that spreadsheet on the screen for everyone else to see. Okay. But if you would just kind of walk us through that, and of course, the beauty of this is you can alter it for what your personal needs are. Once I had that spreadsheet, I kind of altered it with Jim's guidance for what I needed as an entrepreneur. And of course, I took that one step further and altered it again for an organizational success tracking sheet. So we'll go through all of those. So if you say, I'm not a sales rep, or, I don't just do sales, this applies to you. Pay attention. So Jim, if you would kind of walk us through, and we'll show what that slide is, and you can just kind of explain what each item is and why it's so important.
Okay, I'd be glad to. Well, it's a fairly simple spreadsheet, and that's intentional because you absolutely want it to be something that you'll keep up with. So at the top in the upper left, there are sales tracking, and then down below are personal tracking items. These are activities that you would do. The worksheet is designed to be a weekly tracking piece. So it's got a slot for the Monday through Friday each day. And then to the right of that, there's a target that you're shooting for, and then another column for some notes if you need to have any notes in particular about that. For example, it may be a monthly goal and you just happen to be touching on that in this particular week. Underneath the sales tracking, you've got what I'll call leading indicator behaviors. For example, I've got listed on this spreadsheet making LinkedIn posts. That, as you probably are well aware, are things that raise the awareness of your brand. Mm-hmm. And they are also, if you will, social selling pieces, because the importance of getting out there and networking, and or either in person or online, is so that you start to build one-to-one relationships with people. The next one I had listed there was introductions attempted. And what I mean by that is if you want to set the law of reciprocity in place, be sure that you're making introductions for other people. They tend to want, when somebody needs a service that you offer, they tend to think of you when you've been the one that's been helping them. The next two are prospecting pieces. I wrote the word calls attempted. Now that could be emails if you wanted to change and itemize some of these and separate them out. if you want to think of where I use the word calls, you can just say contacts attempted, because that might
Right.
take the form of a knock on the door if you're out there person to person. It might be a phone call if you're outbound calling, either from, even if you're a B2B or a field salesperson, you still would probably be doing some calls and not just doing everything as a walk-in. Then the next thing I put is meaningful conversations. So if you think about your prospecting activities, you got to make so many contact attempts to have so many meaningful conversations to where the person can decide, and you can mutually decide, does it make sense to meet or not? And so the next two pieces there are grayed out. And if you look at the legend at the bottom, it just says the grayed out areas indicates outcomes tracked. So let's set a definition right quickly here. The reason you're tracking your leading indicators are those are things that you control. When I put something in gray and say it's an outcome, that's something you do not have 100% control over. Once you've had that meaningful conversation, people are either going to say, yes, I want to meet, or no, I don't. And you want to track both. And the reason for that, obviously, is to establish certain ratios. By the calls attempted, you're finding out how many calls does it take to get to decision makers, if
Right.
you will. And then once you get to the decision maker, you're having a meaningful conversation to determine is whether or not you're going to meet. And then further down, you're going to hold that meeting with those that agree to. And then you're going to determine how many of those have you closed, which is another outcome. Now, some people may say the sales meeting is an outcome as well. The reason I don't have that grayed out is because you may schedule to have certain meetings, but you may not, something may come up, they have an emergency or there's a death in the family, life happens. And so it's going to be important to know how many meetings did you hold that week so that you can have a fair comparison of how many you closed against that.
Well, it also
Go
won't
ahead.
skew the numbers. So if you say, well, I set 15 meetings every week for 4 weeks, 60 meetings, half of them were rescheduled. So it was actually 30 meetings, or I'm messing up the math here. But if only half of them were original and half of them were booked twice because they were rescheduled, it's really going to skew your numbers, and it's not going to be representative of the correct data. And I'm a data girl.
Yeah, and I guess you would say what you want to be looking at is you're obviously not just setting meetings for the week you're in.
Mm-hmm.
In all likelihood, when you're setting those meetings, they're 1, 2, maybe 3 weeks out.
Right.
So that's why I'm saying those up there, I'm actually tracking that separate, because that's going to give you your ratio of calls to meetings set, which is going to be important ratio to track. Down below, after networking, referrals asked, referrals givens, and strategic alliance meetings or one-to-ones, that's where those are more leading indicators that might lead to getting some meetings.
Right.
Okay. And then the sales meetings actually run. Again, I don't gray that out, because to some degree, those are the ones that may be in play about did you run them or not, because some of them may cancel out. And you'll only want to see how many, obviously the closed ones for that week, you want to have a comparison number of how many actual meetings you ran to see what is your closing ratio for presentations. If I can, I'll also cover at the bottom after that, there's personal tracking. Now I only listed 3 things: physical, mental, spiritual. So if you want mind, body, and attitude, or your spiritual nature, that's who we are as humans. And so it doesn't have to be those 3 per se, but I use those just as an example so that you'll put just a few personal tracking items in there, again, to trap yourself into keeping up with the business goals, or in this case, as the example is for sales. I'm trying to think if there's something else that I should mention in here, Michelle, in terms of, I've already touched on that the reason you're doing the leading indicators is because you can't control the outcomes, and you want to track and do the things that you can control so that you can get to that point.
Well, I think the value
So
of
is there
this.
anything that jumps out at you that you want me to highlight or bring back up about this spreadsheet?
Well, the value that I saw in it when I first saw it was so many times the organizations that I work with, the startups, second stage, scale ups, they don't have a huge sales organization. It may be one or two people, it may be a team of 8 or 10, but it's still not a huge organization. So the leadership levels may be pretty flat, and the individual contributors may not get the one-on-ones and the data that they need to actively be managed. So this allows them on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, and on a trending basis, see, okay, am I doing the activities I need to do to achieve my goals? And is it effective? If not, what do I need to pivot? Where do I need to place more effort and energy and improve my skill sets so that I can reach those goals?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned improving your skill sets, which goes back to training and learning, being a continuous learner and having a positive attitude and a mindset. One of the things that we were kind of touching on is, I'll say, this is something that anybody can print out the blank spreadsheet once you've put the items you wish to track on there.
Mm-hmm.
And literally just take a pencil or pen and stick figure. I just do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the little stick figures as I go through there. And that way, come the end of the week, I can tally it up and see, okay, how did I do versus what my plan was?
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is a lot of these solopreneurs or entrepreneurs, at some point after they've done it themselves, and let's say that they've hired some people that they want to track. Let's say that they've hired some additional salespeople. It's going to be important for them to understand in their business what's a realistic quota.
Right.
And although it's not really part of this spreadsheet, anybody that's done their 5th grade math knows that division is the opposite of multiplication. And so what I teach people to do is simply this. Once you've determined from a profit standpoint what your quota needs to be, how many sales do I need to make to be where I want to be versus my goals. Once you've done that, you can literally back into finding out how much activity you need. And you'll really only need 3 ratios to track that, one of which I don't have on here. Okay. You need to know what's the ratio of meetings, of contacts attempted versus meetings set.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'll call that your sales meeting ratio, your phone ratio. You need to know what everybody understands as a closing ratio, which is how many deals did you close versus the meetings that you ran. And the last one, a lot of people forget about, but it probably holds true, the retention ratio. So to go back to the example that we had, Michelle, in the corporation we were speaking about,
Mm-hmm.
there was a credit application that needed to be approved in order to do business with that. And if for some reason we had sold a deal to somebody that wasn't credit worthy, that deal fell by the wayside, right? We couldn't do that. So that was, we didn't retain that customer. Solopreneurs may think of this as, hey, I sold the deal, but I didn't do a good job in post-selling to where they were understood the business reasons why they did it, and they backed out. They ran back to whoever they had, or they found somebody cheaper or different or whatever. So you'll notice on this particular spreadsheet, I did something that's intentional for beginners that are starting to track this, or beginning salespeople. And I said meaningful calls attempted 40, meaningful conversations 10. That's showing you that 1 out of 4, or 25%, you're going to end up of the people you reach are going to have a meaningful conversation that you have a meaningful conversation with. And then you may only get a meeting with 3 of those 10 or 33%. And I think those are realistic. And if I had to plug in a retention ratio, I'd say you probably just start off at 90% and see if it fluctuates up or down below that. So here's the simple math that we're coming to, why I built up to this. If let's say that you've determined you want to have 4 deals closed a week, okay? Just say 4 and then divide by the 0.25, which was your close for the meeting ratio, divided by 0.33, which is your meaningful, is how many deals that you closed, divided by 0.9. Now, I didn't pull out a calculator, but once you've done that, you're going to have a number. Let's say it's, let's say it's 70 or 80. I think anybody could say, yeah, I can make 80 contact attempts a week. But if your ratios are not that good, they're worse than that. That number may come up and it may say you need 200 contacts a week, which may be unrealistic unless you're just got a really good call dialer system or something that could help you speed dial those things, right?
So here's how you apply strategy to be able to work with those numbers.
Yes, and what I'm getting at there is you'll find that there's an inverse relationship. Any ratio that you improve upon through better training or better skills as you learn from experience, that the number of contacts needed to make your quota goes down. And then the other way to think about that, particularly if you're an entrepreneur, is once you get good at it, you'll end up selling more because you'll set your goals higher, you'll have more meetings, you'll close more deals.
The company that we both formerly worked for, you mentioned the credit approval situation. It just so happens that the target audience was a high-risk target industry, and it was primarily small businesses that were either solopreneurs or a single owner. It was somebody that really didn't have a lot of longevity or fixed income and whatnot, fixed revenue. So to increase that true closing ratio, because a close is not a close until you have revenue coming in, until you get paid. It's not a close.
You gotta pay the bills. Yeah.
Yes. Maybe you're hitting the wrong target. Maybe you're hitting the wrong profile. So
absolutely.
So we've talked on the podcast so many times about ideal client profile. Tweak that. Maybe you need to switch a little bit who you're targeting, or if they're coming to you inbound, maybe in your qualification stage, in your selling and in your disqualification stage, before you invest time and effort, not only yours but theirs, to put them through the credit process, you ask some preliminary questions or you share some preliminary information to say, okay, now the credit application does have these requirements. I want to make sure you're aware of that before you submit your application.
Yeah, and I would add, for the business owners out there, you're obviously going to have the ability to change who you're targeting. Mm-hmm. If you're working within an organization and that's already preset, the example that Michelle's talking about here, one of the things that the corporation did was they bought pre-qualified lists of people that already they knew would pass credit before any call was attempted. So that data exists out there, and you can go down that route. And one of the things that I would be quick to add, though, if you develop a list like that, do not make it a question or even mention it to that person. Hey, the reason I'm calling is because you have good credit.
Well, Dun & Bradstreet said you're an A+.
Right. They already know that. You're not telling them anything new. If anything, you've just hurt yourself because you're saying, I've handicapped this call by knowing that you've got good credit. So would you please, let me beg you to do some business with me, right?
I'm a stalker.
No, you never want to beg. You want to use that equal business stature where you're coming across as equals and never putting yourself in any type of inferior position going in. So I didn't mean to sideline that right there, but
no worries.
You're hitting it from the marketing standpoint, absolutely. Yeah. You want to have an ideal client profile so you know exactly who you're going after. Is like Elmer Fudd in Bugs Bunny, right? Elmer Fudd knew he was hunting for rabbits. And he knew where the rabbits were and when he could find them and when he could catch them. So it's all those things apply, right? Michelle, you got to know what time zone am I calling into? When are they most likely to answer the phone so that I increase my chances of actually being able to set those meetings.
So you want to be Elmer Fudd and not Wile E. Coyote.
Yes. You don't want to be chasing Roadrunner.
So this
never get in chase mode. Make them want to do business with you. Absolutely.
So this reminds me of a client I started working with in the spring. And when we first started talking, he said, okay, my goal, we started talking about goals and how to break that down. He said, my goal for this year is to hit this revenue. And that means since my average deal size is this and my closing ratio is this, I need to set 90 appointments. I need to do 90 demos between now and the end of the year. So with my closing ratio of this, I need to actually have this many appointments.
And if he didn't have anybody back out of a deal, he wouldn't have to worry about that retention ratio. And that's why I bring that up, because that's probably very unrealistic.
Well, even more important than that, Jim, his average deal size was $6,500. I said, we're going to call him Bob. I said, Bob, what if you push that average deal size to $10,000, even $7,500 or $8,000? Let's do the math. And it had a huge reduction in the number of demos he had to do, even if you kept the closing ratio the same. So don't assume that every other number is fixed. You can change your average deal size.
Absolutely. And it just is a matter of who you're going after. Now, the beautiful thing about increasing your deal size is you get better prospects.
Yes, yes.
You get the ones that are where the amount of the money, when you've shown the value, is not important to them.
Right.
Or not as important. Because let's face it, on most sales calls, price is probably third or fourth down the list of the things that they're interested in solving.
And if it's number one, they're not the right customer for you. There's no stickiness there whatsoever.
I agree with you.
So I want to jump over to 2 adaptations I made from your sales activity tracking sheets that helped me in 2 different aspects for my business. So I absolutely give credit where it's due. These are modifications I made to your spreadsheet. And I'm sure I shared the first one with you. I don't think I shared the second one with you. So we're going to share on the screen now the entrepreneurial template. And what this is if you are a solopreneur or just a couple person enterprise, and you are trying to be the one that's out there making the introductions, the one that is making the thought leadership and trying to connect with either potential prospects or get that thought leadership going for your company. It's not necessarily how many calls am I going to make, what's my closing ratio, meaningful conversations and whatnot, but it's very similar to that. So the modifications I made, and again, I'm a data girl, and I want to be able to see at a glance, not just how many have I made, but what is my goal and what's my variance? Because that variance, I don't like negative numbers in red. Will motivate me. So find what motivates you. So these are some of the samples. LinkedIn is very important in my business. I personally do not sell on LinkedIn, but I make connections. I offer my assistance and support. I use it as thought leadership. I use it to share value. So making LinkedIn posts and making LinkedIn quality connections, very important to me. I need to make sure I do that consistently. Truthfully, it's a battle. It really is. Jim, you're an expert at that. I'm still working on it. That's one of my personal success tracking things that I need to continue working on too. Same thing with networking. It's probably as important or more important for entrepreneurs to be out there networking, whether it's for potential customers, whether it's for channel partners, whether it's within the industry, it doesn't matter. You need to be networking. You need to have multiple ways of getting eyes on your company, on you, on your product or service. Also, you need to expand your learning, therefore your company's learning. So whether it's listening to a podcast, I would recommend Go, Go, Grow, or if it's watching webinars. And you'll find some webinars on the Revenue Chasers channel as well. Jim Kerlin, you have a YouTube channel. Would you care to share what your handle is?
It's my name. It's at Jim Kerlin. That's spelled, I think everybody can get the Jim part. Kerlin is like Merlin, but with a K.
Wonderful.
So at Jim Kerlin for it. In there, I've probably got upwards of 80 different videos that have to do with mostly sales tips. Some of them are mindset and things related to that, because everything in sales typically deals with either your mindset or your behavior or some type of a technique that you're trying to improve upon.
Absolutely. And those types of sales resources can be applied to so much more than just the act of selling. So if you're not necessarily a sales or marketing person, you're going to find value. And first of all, as a side note, Jim Kerlin, one of the finest, most giving human beings I've ever known. So my personal recommendation for you, Jim.
Thank you. Let me add something that you mentioned on some of these pieces that you're pointing out that you were tracking. And unless you're selling something that's very transactional, such as, I'll just use the simple Girl Scout cookies type example. I've got Thin Mints. Do you want some? Great. Give me 2 boxes. Here's your money. Most people that are in business, if they're selling a professional service or a product, it's more complex than that. And they're probably going to need to have a meaningful conversation to determine if they have that. If they want to sit down and talk to you and have that conversation or not. So the LinkedIn post, I agree with you. Very few people are going to have something that takes them over to anything other than selling the meeting with them. They may not be closing a deal on LinkedIn. And that's really, the term social selling is such a misnomer, because social selling should really be called building relationships online, because that's really what you're doing, so that you can get the meeting. Because, as well as I do, when you're making a phone call to somebody, once you engage that person, you're not trying to sell them now over the phone. There's only one thing that you have in mind for that conversation, that is either set a meeting or not. So really the only thing you're selling is the meeting, whether that's going to be remote or in person.
And yourself. So, you've got to sell yourself. They buy from people. They buy from people.
And the thing about the networking piece that you mentioned too, I'll emphasize this. You want to be able to build deep relationships. That is going to mostly happen face to face. If there's an improved chance when you're networking face to face over just through social media channels. And it doesn't matter which channel you're on. That's you want to be where your customers, your potential clients are, whether that's Instagram, Facebook, wherever. But that networking, the reason that's important is, as a new entrepreneur, you don't want to stay in constant prospecting mode all of your life. You want to get that. Everybody starts the same. You got to get the speed up. You got to get up to 40,000 feet. You don't start at 40,000 feet, to use a airplane analogy. And the way you get to 40,000 feet, though, is because you've networked, and now you've got people that you're giving referrals to, you're receiving referrals from, and even the clients that you make, you turn them into referral partners too, where they're referring you to your next people that you want to talk to. And that makes getting those meetings and getting to those numbers a lot easier. Continuously prospecting. Should you still make some calls? I think you should. I think you should, even if you don't need to. I think it keeps you equipped for having those conversations and learning more about your customers. So anyway, that's all I wanted to add about that, Michelle.
No problem. And of course, I always try and refer back to other episodes that touch on these topics. I have another episode coming up. I believe it'll come out after this episode with you, Jim. But it's about thought leadership, and it's about how important these posts on LinkedIn are, not for selling. It's for thought leadership. You are your brand. In fact, your brand and your brand imaging and what people think of you is far more powerful than your marketing. So check out that episode on thought leadership. I think you'll find it quite valuable. So I want to just touch on one or two more things with the entrepreneurial tracking, and then I want to touch on the strategic planning for the organization. For the entrepreneurial tracking, I mentioned about the learning goals, and that can take whatever form it may be. There's also big goals. Whether it's personal or professional, everybody should have big goals. And it's not something that demands 100% of your attention, but it's probably something that it's going to be a little bit longer term, and it's probably something you have to chip away at, but you need to chip away consistently. So, for example, one of my personal tracking goals, my big goal, I was selling my house in Atlanta and moving to Florida. That was a big goal for a while. And an hour here or there made a lot of progress. It kept me on track, and I was able to achieve that. I'm working on some things for my business right now where I'm creating workshops and content. I can't do that in 3 days or a weekend. I need to do it week over week over week over week. So as an entrepreneur, business owner, those are the types of things you're going to put on your entrepreneurial activity and success tracking, but you're going to customize it for what you need.
May I build on that too?
Absolutely.
It's important for entrepreneurs to schedule time for the important but not urgent matters, for these big goals, if you will. So you want to think about that as, I'm going to set a meeting with myself, and then I'm going to keep it. Nothing's going to break down the door and get in there, so that I have this important time. Some people have heard of the Eisenhower matrix, which is 4 quadrants that are built on the axis of important or not important, and urgent or not urgent. And of course, the urgent and important, I consider that firefighting. Eisenhower said that's what you want to be working on. And I hate to disagree with the former president.
I do.
But in terms of time management, I say to you, if you work on the not urgent but important and block time for that on your calendar with yourself or whoever else needs to be a part of that, it never becomes urgent.
Or you have a trusted team member that you can add to delegate at that point that it starts smoldering. So you can put it out before it's a fire. So if it's kind of escaped you a little bit,
It's reminding me, you just reminded me though of how important time management is for owners. They have to have a good, they have to develop good time management skills. And you've heard it said, and you know this, if there's some task that is less than you are trying to make per hour, farm it out. That's what all these virtual assistant businesses are there for.
Right. All right. So I want to touch on one more, and I'm not going to drill down on this one because I have 2 great resources that I'm going to point you to. The first one is season 1. I can't tell you what episode it is, but it is on strategic planning, top down, bottom up, side to side. The second one is on the Revenue Chasers website page. It is a panel interview that I was part of. They go way in depth on this, so I'm going to go very lightly. So with the organizational tracker, it is based on SMART goals. Hopefully everybody has at least heard of them. SMART, very specific goals, measurable. It's gotta be finite. You can't just say, "Oh, I want to make a lot of money." It's got to be attainable. You can't say, "Okay, well, all right, I am not a size 2. If I were to say I want to be a size 2 next month, yeah, that's not attainable. It's got to be relevant. You can't say, well, I manufacture cardboard boxes and I want to build a jet in the next 6 months. Time bound. You have to know within what time frame you want to do it. So, for example, using my company for example, I would like Revenue Chasers to build a coursework, a course plan of 5 workshops that are going to be able to be available online or in person that will be delivered to 500 people. That's attainable. It's very relevant. It'll be about scaling your company, and it will be done in the next 12 months. That's a SMART goal. So looking at the chart that's on the screen right now, we have the quarterly goal at the top. It says the SMART definition. At the bottom, I want you to detail exactly what that goal is using every single one of those letters. The short-term goals to reach that big goal. So, for example, my 5 courseworks. Well, my first goal is to, for example, plan those workshops. My second goal may be to figure out how I'm going to market it. The third one may actually be the delivery. Well, each of those goals, they're going to have certain actions that I'm going to need to do in order to achieve those 3 kind of bite-sized goals. And I'm going to say exactly which action I'm going to do by when. Jim, when was it? Early 2000s?
Yeah.
So these don't have to be done concurrently. What I just described to you probably would not be done concurrently. Delivering it is not going to be done at the same time or before I come up with content. So I may be thinking along those lines. So action number 1 for goal number 3, as far as delivering the content, yeah, I'm going to be thinking along those lines when I'm thinking of the content. So action number 1 on goal number 3 may be due in 6 weeks, but the delivery is not going to be due for 8 months. And then the last column is the update. So you can make notes there. I achieved this, this is delayed, this is pushed out 60 days, whatever the case may be. And this helps keep you in track with the organizational goals that you have. I would say try this out for 1 goal, for 1 quarter for the organization. Make sure that you understand it, that you can execute it, that the entire organization can communicate, collaborate, and coordinate their efforts to deploy it, and then you can roll it out for the rest. Your thoughts, Jim? You see your what you originated here, right?
You did share this with me as you were moving through your goals here. So yes, I applaud that you went to this level. Now, there are different personality styles out there, and for the personality style that's very dominant, to think in terms of the DISC type of those 4 types of personality types.
That'd be me.
This is going to be a challenge for that person because they're just going to want to say, well, I know how to do this. And they don't ever want to commit to writing or tracking it. So for the detail-oriented person that is data-driven like yourself, this is going to be much easier to do. And then there's a couple other personality styles in there. So this is not going to be an easy thing to do for all the different personality styles that are out there. But I highly recommend that you follow Michelle's lead on this because it will help you visualize, which is going to be important to keep it in front of you. And it's going to help you work on it and drill down to an action plan for each of those goals. So, if you want to take something very, very simple, you could take something as easy as, let's pick on a personal goal here for weight. Let's say that you want to shed some pounds. Never say you want to lose weight because you'll just try to find it. If you think it's lost, you'll try to find it. So just say I want to shed so many pounds. But you can't say I want to shed 20 pounds in 3 months. Get very specific and say, I weigh, and name a number.
I'm 126, by the way.
I weigh 180 pounds by December 31st, 2024. it meets all the criteria. It's specific. You can measure it. It should be reasonable when you set that. Is it relevant? Well, it depends on how well you want your health to be, right? And by time bound, it has to have a deadline. You have to set a deadline. It doesn't mean that the deadline can't move as you need to adjust if you realize that was not as realistic as you thought it should be. But you keep a deadline on there so you can say it was met or not. So kudos to you for not just developing the spreadsheet to show somebody this, Michelle, but for actually doing it, because I saw that you did this and it was working very well for you.
So I am the dominant one that developed it. I'm the detailed one that went to the level of let's fill all this out. But I'm not the disciplined one that executes it religiously. I need to work on that. And the reason I do it in Excel rather than printing it out is because I make a brand new tab for each week. And then I keep a workbook and I can see the historical progress that I've made. So that may work for some people.
And different organizations, depending on their client relationship management software, may have some of these tracking pieces built in. Great if they do. But if they don't, this gives the back to the basics type approach so that somebody can get started and they know, hey, I know what I'm doing here.
Yeah.
I can track this. I can do this.
It's very similar to the Big Rocks program. So if you're familiar with that, maybe from a corporate setting, it's very much along those lines. So we've shared a lot with you today, and I will include the links to the spreadsheets, all three spreadsheets. I will include information for Jim's company. I will have links in there for his YouTube and for Revenue Chasers as well. And I encourage you to dig really deep into this information because it will help you either as an individual or as a business owner to really scale your company, but also upskill and up you professionally and personally. I will also indicate in the show notes which other episodes and webinars that you can access as well. Do you have any closing thoughts for us, Jim?
I would say this. Somebody that's listening to this is saying, I got a better way. That's all nice, Michelle, but I got a better way. And I would challenge them and say, I would give them a Yoda quote from the Star Wars and say, you must unlearn what you have learned. If you don't give it a try, you don't know if it's going to work for you. It's like the kid that doesn't want to eat spinach because he's never tried it. He just says, I don't like the taste of spinach, but he's never tried it. I would challenge them.
That's my husband.
Oh, is it? But I would challenge them to say, these are great tools. If you've got something and it's working just for you, by all means, just ignore this. But if you don't have tools like this that help you focus on the basics, you're being given a great opportunity here to improve yourself and improve your business. So I highly recommend it.
Thank you. And the good news is this is one of the workshops that I will be putting together as a video training, and it will be available sometime in the very, very near future. So thank you, Jim, for joining us. It's always a pleasure to speak with you, and now I have the joy of seeing you as well. I would invite you.
Thank you again for letting me be part of this today.
Well, of course. And I'm going to give you a hot second to talk to us about the nonprofit you're a board member of.
With Creative Community Services Incorporated, it's a nonprofit that transforms the lives of foster kids and youth and their families. And if you'd like to have a conversation about ways that you can donate, volunteer, or perhaps even consider being a foster home, I just put I'll call it an elevator pitch post out on LinkedIn and on YouTube about that you can look at that touches on those things right now. And I would say if you have a heart for giving to others and you think you might want to consider serving on a board of directors for something like this, I'd welcome that conversation as well.
As I mentioned, Jim Kerlin is one of the finest human beings I've ever met. He truly is a gem. Thank you, Jim. Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Go, Go, Grow. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode. As always, check us out on YouTube, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, on whatever your favorite podcast venue may be. Like us, rate us, of course, a 5, because we're fabulous, and share us with someone else who can find value in what we share. I appreciate you watching. Please let us know what else you want to see, and I hope each of you have a profitable, productive, happy, and healthy day. Thank you for joining us.